Notification came at 6 hours 30 minutes and 47 seconds in the morning. Not a call, not a knock, a notification from my building's front desk app. The kind that pops up when a guest refuses to leave the lobby and the doorman doesn't know what else to do. I was already dressed. I work early. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone and stood very still in my kitchen with my coffee going cold in my hand. My brother was standing at the front desk with his arms crossed. My mother was behind him, her coat buttoned wrong, the left side hanging lower than the right. My father was by the glass door with his back to the camera, but I knew his posture the way you know a scar you've had since childhood. I hadn't seen any of them in 7 years. I set my coffee down. I did not buzz them up. I called the front desk directly and told Marcus, who had worked the morning shift there for 3 years and knew my name and my coffee order and the fact that I never ever had family visitors, that I was aware of the situation and that he should tell them I would be down in 10 minutes. Then I went to my home office, opened my laptop and sent 3 emails. 1 to my attorney, 1 to my supervisor, 1 to a colleague I trusted. Then I went downstairs. My brother's name is Derek. He is 4 years older than me, which would make him 36 now, and he looked it, heavier in the face, a little worn around the eyes, wearing a jacket that was too thin for the weather. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. My father had turned around by the time the elevator opened and he watched me cross the lobby the way he always had, like he was deciding something. I stopped about 6 feet away from them. I did not hug anyone. I did not say it's good to see you or you look well or any of the other things people say when they don't mean them. I said, "You have 5 minutes. Marcus, could you give us a moment?" Marcus nodded and stepped into the back office. He left the door open. I appreciated that. My mother started to cry immediately. I had expected that. She had always led with tears the way other people lead with words. It was its own kind of language, one I had spent most of my childhood learning to translate. What it usually meant was, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." What it usually meant was, "You owe us something." My brother spoke first. He said, "We need your help." I said, "With what?" He looked at my father. My father looked at me. There was a pause that lasted long enough for me to understand that whatever they were about to say, they had rehearsed it. They had driven here or flown, I didn't know, and somewhere along the way they had decided who was going to speak and in what order and which version of events they were going to present to me. My father said, "There's been a misunderstanding at your brother's company." I waited. My mother said, "It's not what it looks like." I waited. Derek said, "The accounting was complicated. You know how these things get. There were multiple accounts, transfers between subsidiaries. The auditors are not, they don't have the full picture. And if someone who understood the structure could just explain." I held up one hand. I said, "How much?" He stopped. I said, "How much money, Derek?" He looked at the floor. He said, $240,000. The lobby was very quiet. Outside a bus went past. My mother made a sound like she was trying to swallow something. I said, "From where?" He said, "The Hargrove Foundation." I knew the Hargrove Foundation. Everyone in the city knew the Hargrove Foundation. They funded after-school programs in poor districts. They ran a summer camp for kids with disabilities that had a 3-year waiting list. They did a charity gala every October that raised money for grief counseling services. They were, by any measure, one of the most genuinely good organizations in the region. My brother had been their director of finance for 2 years. I stood there and I looked at him, at the thinning hair and the expensive shoes and the jacket that was too thin for the weather, and I felt something settle into place inside me. Not anger. Something colder than anger. The thing that lives on the other side of surprise, when you realize you were not actually surprised at all. I said, "You want me to talk to the auditors?" He said, "You work in compliance. You speak the language. You could just," I said, "I could just lie for you." My mother said, "Sarah." I said, "No, I want to be clear about what's being asked. You want me to present a false account of financial transactions to an active audit of a non-profit that serves children. You want me to use my professional credentials and my professional reputation to obstruct an investigation. That is what you're asking." My father said, "You're making it sound worse than it is." And there it was, The exact sentence. The same sentence, 7 years and 1,000 miles away from the last time I had heard it, and it landed in exactly the same place it always had, right at the base of my sternum, like a key turning in a lock I'd spent years trying to change. The last time he said that sentence to me, I was 17 years old. I was standing in the kitchen of the house where I grew up, wearing a shirt with a bloodstain on the sleeve that I had tried and failed to wash out, and my brother had just told my parents that I had started it, that I had provoked him, that the bruise on my face and the cut on my forearm were, in some essential way, a consequence of my own behavior. My father had said, "You're making it sound worse than it is." My mother had said, "Your brother has a temper. You know how he gets." I had looked at both of them for a long moment. Then I had gone upstairs, packed a bag and walked out of that house. I was 17 years old. I had $230 and a phone with a cracked screen and the phone number of my English teacher, Miss Tarr. Miss Marnoff, my English teacher, Calloway, who had once told me during a class about The Great Gatsby that some people confuse loyalty with complicity and that the two things are not the same. I called Miss Calloway from a gas station 3 miles from my house. She picked up on the second ring. She let me sleep on her couch. She helped me apply for early emancipation and a scholarship to a state school 2 states away. She came to my college graduation. She has never once asked me to do anything I wasn't willing to do. I thought about her while I stood in my building lobby at 6:52 in the morning looking at my family. I said, "I'm going to say this once. I am not going to talk to the auditors. I'm not going to review the records. I am not going to write a letter, make a call, send an email or appear in any official capacity on Derek's behalf." And I needed to understand that what I do for work means that I am now required to document this conversation. My mother's breath caught. I said, "I sent an email to my attorney before I came downstairs. It is time-stamped. It contains the names of everyone present and a summary of what I was told. If anyone contacts me again about this matter through any channel, that documentation becomes part of a formal record." Derek said, "You wouldn't." I looked at him. I said, "The last time I trusted this family, I was 17 years old and I needed stitches and you told Mom and Dad that I fell down the stairs." No one said anything. I said, "I didn't fall down the stairs." My father started to say something. I shook my head once and something in my expression must have communicated that this was not a conversation because he stopped. I said, "I'm going back upstairs. Marcus is going to ask you to leave and I would encourage you to do so without making it difficult for him because he is a good person and he doesn't deserve to be in the middle of this." I paused. "I genuinely hope that you find a way through whatever comes next. I mean that, but I cannot be any part of it." I turned around and walked back to the elevator. My mother said my name. I did not turn around. "I need to tell you about the stairs. Not because it's the whole story. It's not. But because if you're going to understand what happened over the next 3 weeks, you need to understand what kind of family I came from, what I was used to, what I had spent 7 years building a life in direct opposition to. I grew up in a small city in Ohio in a house with yellow shutters and a basketball hoop in the driveway that nobody used. My father sold commercial insurance. My mother did bookkeeping part-time for a couple of local businesses. We were not poor. We were not extraordinary. We were the kind of family that looked completely normal from the outside and had its own private weather system on the inside. Pressure systems that built for days before they broke, and when they broke, it was always my fault. Derek was 6 years older than me. No, wait. I said 4 earlier. He's 4 years older. I do this sometimes, inflate the distance between us, because 4 years doesn't feel like enough to explain the difference in how we were treated. He was the firstborn son. He was naturally athletic and effortlessly charming in the particular way that some people are charming, not because they work at it, but because they've never had to. He never got in real trouble, or rather, when he got in trouble, it had a way of becoming someone else's trouble by the time my parents finished processing it. I was the difficult one. That was the word they used. Difficult. I asked too many questions. I kept records of things. Not on purpose, not strategically. Just because I had a precise memory and a strong sense of when the version of events I was being presented didn't match the version I had lived through. This was not considered an asset in my household. It was considered a provocation. The night I left, Derek and I had argued about money. He had borrowed $300 from me from the envelope in my room where I kept my babysitting earnings without asking, and when I confronted him about it, the argument escalated in the way that arguments in that house always escalated, which is to say that it became about everything except the original issue. By the end of it, I had a cut on my arm from the edge of his class ring and a bruise on my cheekbone from when I had stumbled back against the doorframe. He had a story. The story worked. The stories always worked. The thing about leaving at 17, about really leaving, not running away in the way that implies you'll eventually come back, is that it requires you to build every single thing yourself. There is no inheritance of ease. There is no soft landing. There are counselors and scholarships and work-study jobs and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from constructing a life out of sheer stubbornness while everyone around you seems to have been handed a foundation and you are still mixing the concrete. But I built it. It took me 10 years and I built it. I have a one-bedroom apartment on the 14th floor of a building with a good doorman and a gym in the basement. I have a job I am very good at. I work in financial compliance, which means I spend my days finding the gaps between what numbers say and what they mean, and I am very good at it because I grew up in a house where I had to become fluent in exactly that gap. I have 2 close friends, a therapist I see every other Thursday, and a cat named Cosmo who is indifferent to my emotional state in a way I find deeply comforting. I had not been happy in the way people mean when they say that word on social media, but I had been steady. I had been stable. I had been safe. And then my family found out where I lived and the steadiness cracked a little and I had to decide what to do with the crack. The first thing that happened after the lobby conversation was that Derek called me 11 times in 3 days. I did not answer. I forwarded the call log to my attorney whose name is Patricia and who has been my attorney for 4 years and has never once made me feel like my caution was excessive. The second thing that happened was that my mother sent me a letter. An actual paper letter in an envelope with my childhood address as the return. I opened it because I was curious and because I have learned that it is better to know the content of things than to let them exist unopened in your imagination. The letter was 4 pages long. It covered in order how much I had been missed, how much my absence had hurt the family, how Derek had always struggled with impulse control and had never meant to hurt me, how family was the only thing that truly mattered in this world, how I had clearly done very well for myself and wasn't it time to let old wounds heal, and finally, a single paragraph near the end that mentioned almost as an aside that Derek's situation was quite serious and that a character from someone in my professional position could make a real difference to how the judge viewed things. I read that last paragraph 3 times. Then I photographed all 4 pages and sent them to Patricia. The third thing that happened was that someone filed a complaint with my company's HR department. The complaint was anonymous. It alleged that I had a conflict of interest in a current audit project, which was false. I had no involvement in anything connected to the Hargrove Foundation, and that my professional judgment could not be trusted due to undisclosed personal relationships with individuals under investigation. My supervisor called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon. Her name is Diane and she has this specific energy of someone who has managed people for 20 years and has seen every variety of workplace drama and is not impressed by any of it. She slid the complaint across her desk and watched me read it. I read it carefully. Then I slid it back. I said, "I know who filed this." She said, "I assumed you did." I said, "I'd like to walk you through the timeline." She nodded. I pulled out my phone and showed her the time-stamped email I had sent to Patricia on the morning of my family's visit. I showed her the call log. I showed her the photograph of my mother's letter. I showed her the 3-sentence summary of the lobby conversation that I had typed into a notes app while riding the elevator back up to my apartment. Diane looked at all of it for a long time. She said, "Sarah, do you document everything?" I said, "I grew up in a house where the official version of events was whatever my brother said it was. So, yes, I document everything." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The complaint is going to be dismissed. I want you to know that. But I also want you to know that if there's any further contact that bleeds into your professional life, I need to hear about it immediately." I said I understood. I thanked her. I went back to my desk and I sat there for a moment with my hands flat on the keyboard and I breathed. I was not going to let this take anything else from me. I'd already given them 17 years. I was not giving them one more thing. The fourth thing that happened was the one I hadn't anticipated. I was in line at the coffee place near my office, the one with the exposed brick and the barista who always spells my name wrong, and I stopped correcting him when I felt someone standing too close behind me. Not random crowded coffee shop close. Intentionally close. The kind of close that communicates something. I turned around and my brother was there. He looked terrible. Not dramatically terrible. Not movie breakdown terrible. Just the particular terribleness of someone who hasn't been sleeping and knows that the walls are closing in and is not sure which direction to run. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there in the lobby. His jacket was the same one. He said, "I just want to talk." I said, "You could have called." He said, "You don't answer." I said, "That's correct." He said, "Sarah." And then he stopped and something passed over his face. Not quite remorse, not exactly, but something in that neighborhood. Something adjacent. He said, "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything." I said, "You're right. You don't." He said, "I'm not asking you to lie. I'm not. I know what I asked in the lobby was wrong. That was wrong. I know that. I'm just asking you to." He paused. He was looking at the floor. "I'm asking you to not actively work against me. That's all. Just stay out of it." I looked at him. I looked at the line which had moved and stepped forward, and he stepped forward, too. I said, "Derek, I am not assigned to anything related to your case. I don't have the power to help you or hurt you professionally. The audit that is examining your records is being conducted by people who have never met me and don't know you exist. Whatever is happening to you right now is a consequence of what you did. I did not do this to you." He said, "I know." I said, "Do you? Because the complaint that was filed with my HR department this week suggests that someone in your corner thinks I'm a useful obstacle to knock down." He blinked. He said, "I didn't file that." I studied his face for a moment. He was many things. My brother and I had learned over years to read him the way you learn to read. Whether not perfectly, not always, but well enough to know when a storm was real and when it was performance. He looked genuinely confused. I said, "Mom or Dad?" He closed his eyes briefly. That was answer enough. I ordered my coffee. I paid. I picked up the cup and I turned to face him one more time and I said, "I'm going to tell you something and I need you to actually hear it. Not to argue with it, not to find the counterpoint. Just hear it." He nodded. I said, "You took money from an organization that runs summer camps for disabled kids. Whatever your reasons were, whatever complicated accounting story you've built around it, that's what happened. And somewhere in you, you know that. And the way out of what's happening to you is not through me. It is not through our parents. The way out is through the truth and whatever comes after the truth, which I know is terrifying, but it is the only way through." I paused. "I'm sorry for that. I genuinely am. But I can't be your way around it." I walked out. He didn't follow me. 3 weeks after the lobby, the audit concluded. I know this because it was in the local news. Not front page, but the non-profit section. The kind of story that runs online and gets shared by people who care about that sort of thing. The Hargrove Foundation released a statement. A full forensic accounting had identified financial irregularities totaling $247,000 over 18 months. The foundation's board had cooperated fully with investigators. Appropriate legal action was being pursued. They did not name Derek in the press release. He was named in the court filing, which was public record. Patricia called me that afternoon. She said the anonymous HR complaint had been formally traced. Not to Derek, but to a secondary email account created 3 days after my family showed up in my lobby. The account had been created from an IP address registered to my parents' home in Ohio. Diane had been informed. The documentation trail I had built made the whole thing very clean, very clear, and very unambiguous. Patricia said, "You did everything right." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you okay?" I sat with that question for a moment. Outside my window, the city was doing its usual thing. Buses and pigeons and two guys arguing over parking spot with the kind of passionate investment that only a parking spot can inspire. Cosmo was on the windowsill, deeply uninterested in all of it. I said, "I think so. I will be." She said she'd be in touch. My mother called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. I waited an hour and then I listened to the message. She was crying. Genuinely this time, I think. Not the strategic crying from the lobby, but the real kind. The kind that doesn't have an audience. She said Derek had gotten a lawyer. She said she was scared. She said she missed me every single day. She said she knew she hadn't protected me the way she should have and she didn't know how to say sorry in a way that was worth anything. I listened to the whole thing. Then I sat there for a long time. I'm not going to tell you that I felt nothing. I felt quite a lot. I felt the specific grief of loving people who failed you, which is different from the grief of losing people who were good to you and in some ways harder because you are mourning something that never fully existed. I felt 17 again for about 4 minutes in the way that specific pieces of music or specific smells can collapse time without warning. I felt tired. But underneath all of it, underneath the grief and the 17 years ago and the tired, I felt something solid. The floor that I had built board by board over a decade. The floor that did not move when other things moved. I did not call her back that night. I went to bed early for once. I slept deeply. In the morning I made good coffee and sat by the window and watched the city wake up and thought about the day ahead, which was full of ordinary things. A 9 o'clock meeting, a report due by noon, lunch with my friend Carla who always makes me laugh, and Thursday, which was therapy day. I thought, I will decide what to do about my mother later. I will sit with it and think about it and take it to therapy and make a decision that I can live with. I am not going to rush it and I am not going to let it be made for me. That felt like enough for now. There's a thing they don't tell you about building a life from scratch, from nothing, from a duffel bag and a cracked phone and a teacher's couch at 17 years old. They don't tell you that the hardest part isn't the beginning. The beginning is hard in ways that are visible, obvious, external. The kind of hard you can point to and name and survive through sheer momentum. The hardest part is later. When you have the apartment and the job and the cat and the floor beneath your feet. When your old life shows up in your lobby in a coat buttoned wrong asking you to burn the new one down. The hardest part is staying. Staying in the life you built. Staying in your own story instead of being pulled back into theirs. Staying in the version of yourself that exists on the other side of everything you walked away from. I sent a text to Miss Calloway that afternoon. Just thinking of you. Hope you're well. She wrote back 6 hours later because she keeps a flip phone and types slowly. Always proud of you. Keep going. I put my phone down and scratched Cosmo behind his ears and he regarded me with the vast indifference of a creature who has never had to justify himself to anyone and I thought, yeah, that's about right. Keep going.